Welcome to Searching the Scriptures. Our Bible teacher will be Gunther von Harringa Sr. In this series of studies, we will be focusing on the book of Judges. Without further ado, let's look into God's Word, the Bible.
Welcome to Searching the Scriptures. This is going to be study number 15 in the book of Judges, and we're down to verse 3 of chapter 1. And Judah said unto Simeon, his brother, Come up with me into my lot, that we may fight against the Canaanites. And I likewise will go with thee into thy lot. So Simeon went with him. We've been looking at Genesis 49, 5-7 recently to determine the spiritual identity of Simeon, who's often associated with Levi, as we see in Genesis 49, 5-7. And by looking at Genesis 49, verse 1, we understand that this chapter has to do with the last days. And so that would include the 1955 years of the church age, the Great Tribulation and the latter rain, as well as our current day of judgment. We read in Genesis 49:1, And Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. We sense, of course, that there's a great deal of spiritual truth contained within Genesis 49. However, we want to focus our attention on verses 5 and 7 because they relate specifically to Simeon. We also read there, Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly. Mine honor be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they dig down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. So in our previous lesson, we began looking at verse 5 of Genesis 49, and particularly the phrase, instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. And I wanted to investigate this term, their habitations, which is Strong's number 4380. But since it's only used in Genesis 49:5, and its root word is dubious, I decided to examine another Hebrew word that is also rendered habitations in Psalm 74:20. And this is Strong's number 4990, and it's actually in Psalm 74:20, it's connected to the identical word cruelty that we find in Genesis 49:5, and the way that it's translated in the 12 passages that it's found is habitations, pastures, houses, and places. And we saw that all but two of these citations reflect the wrath of God on the churches and denominations throughout the church age, and also upon the world at large in the day of judgment, which we are presently in. But before considering the other verses, the rest of verse 5 and verses 5 and 6 of Genesis 49, I thought it might be best to look a little closer at Psalm 74 first, and particularly verse 20. But throughout Psalm 74, one finds a number of pleas and questions directed to God on behalf of the elect, as well as a series of statements that serve to extol God's magnificent power in creation, as well as his great mercy in salvation. Then the psalm is also punctuated with numerous petitions for God to act on behalf of his people. And at various points throughout the psalm, the thoughts as well as the deeds of the wicked are brought to light. And this is as a reminder to God, not that God needs to be reminded of anything. We are the ones that need to be reminded all the time, because we forget much of what we learn. However, we see, for example, an evidence of at least of the questions in the very first verse of this psalm. Again, this is Psalm 74, and these are heartfelt questions that are being voiced, as it were, in the ears of the Almighty. Maskil, which is another word for a poem, of Asaph. O God, why hast thou cast us off forever? Why doth thine anger smoke against the sheep of thy pasture? This is also followed up with a couple other questions in verses 10 and 11. O God, how long shall the adversary reproach? Shall the enemy blaspheme thy name forever? Why withdrawest thou thy hand, even thy right hand? And so in these next set of references, God is being implored about a number of issues. For example, in verse 2, it says, remember thy congregation. Verse 3 says, lift up thy feet. Verse 9, we see not our signs. Also in verse 9, there is no more any prophet. Again in verse 9, neither is there among us any that knoweth how long. Verse 11, pluck it out of thy bosom, referring to God's hand. Verse 19, O deliver not the soul of thy turtle dove unto the multitude of the wicked. Again in verse 19, forget not the congregation of thy poor forever. Verse 21, O let not the oppressed return ashamed. Let the poor and needy praise thy name. And lastly, in verse 22, arise, O God, plead thine own cause. Now, by contrast, the wicked are also brought to remembrance, as it were, in this psalm. Excuse me, in verse 3, excuse me. In verse 3 it says, the enemy hath done wickedly in the sanctuary. Verse 4, thine enemies roar in the midst of thy congregations. They set up their ensigns for signs. Verse 6, now they break down the carved work thereof at once with axes and hammers. Verse 7, they have cast fire into thy sanctuary. Also in verse 7, they have defiled by casting down the dwelling place of thy name to the ground. Verse 8, they said in their hearts, let us destroy them together. Verse 8, they have burned up all the synagogues of God in the land. Verse 18, remember this, that the enemy hath reproached, O Jehovah. Again in verse 18, and that the foolish people have blasphemed thy name. Verse 22, remember how the foolish man which would be the unsaved, reproacheth thee daily. And verse 23, forget not the voice of thine enemies, the tumult of those that rise up against thee increaseth continually. Now these next passages cover verses 12 through 17, and they really extol God's unequaled power and wisdom and might. Verse 12, for God is my King of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. Verse 13, thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Verse 14, thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Verse 15, thou didst cleave the fountain and the flood. Thou driest up mighty rivers. Verse 16, the day is thine. The night also is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun. Verse 17, thou hast set all the borders of the earth. Thou hast made summer and winter. Well, that's just a little bit of background on Psalm 74. We really want to investigate verse 20, which says, have respect unto the covenant, for the dark places of the earth are full of the habitations of cruelty, because it's so similar to what we read in Genesis 49:5. And so why don't we begin with the term cruelty, which, as I mentioned in our previous lesson, is Strong's number 2555. And again, it's found in Genesis 49:5, and it's really modifying the instruments which are in the habitations, pastures, houses, and places of Simeon and Levi. And this word cruelty shows up about 60 times in the Old Testament and is rendered as violence or violent, cruelty or cruel, wrong, false, damage, injustice, unrighteousness, etc. And we want to look at a few of them. For example, in Genesis 6, 11 through 13, we see both the thoughts as well as the actions of mankind prior to the flood in 4990 BC. Genesis 6, 11 and 13. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So in both of these verses, the first one is with violence, and verse 13 is violence. We can also go to Jonah 3:8, which gives a very accurate description of the inhabitants of Nineveh. And again, note that the violence stems from their hands. And we've talked about this before, that the hand, like the foot, indicates one's will. Again, this is Jonah 3:8. And these are the words of the king when he found out the message of judgment that Jonah brought to the city as he traversed the city over a course of 3 days. But let man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and cry mightily unto God. Yea, let them turn every one from his evil way, and from the violence, and from the violence is this word, Strong's number 2555, that is in their hands. We also find that violence also can be found in one's mouth, according to these next citations. In Psalm 27:12 we read, "Deliver me not over unto the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty." And again, this word, Strong's number 2555, is here translated as cruelty. And Psalm 35:11 is a similar verse, but it's translated here in Psalm 35:11 as false. False witnesses did rise up. They laid to my charge things that I knew not. The next phrase we want to look at is here in Psalm 74:20, is for the dark places of the earth. Have respect unto the covenant, for the dark places of the earth are full of the habitations of cruelty. What does this mean? What is this referring to? What does God intend by these two words, the dark, Strong's number 4285, and places of the earth, which is Strong's number 776. They are full of the habitations of cruelty. We also want to keep in mind that this word for earth, Strong's number 776, is translated twice as many times as land, twice as many times as earth. And it's referring spiritually to the external representation of the kingdom of God, the nation of Israel in the first instance, and then secondly, as a picture of the institutional churches and denominations. We can go to verse 6 of Lamentations 3, 1-6, which is another reference to the same term, dark places, which is how it's translated here. And this passage is really typifying the Lord Jesus as he was atoning for the sins of his people prior to creation. I am the man that hath seen affliction by the rod of his wrath. He hath led me and brought me into darkness, but not into light. Surely against me is he turned. He turneth his hand against me all the day. My flesh and my skin hath he made old. He hath broken my bones. He hath builded against me, and compassed me with gall and travail. He hath set me in dark places, as they that be dead of old. And so it's quite similar to Jonah chapter 2, where we find Christ in the belly of the whale, or in the belly of hell, as it's referred to. And it's talking about the fact that he had to become sin. He was placed under the wrath of God for the sins of his people. He died and he was annihilated. But then he rose again from the dead, because even though this is very, very mysterious, we can't understand it. We can't even understand how God can be killed, number one, much less rise again from the dead after being annihilated. But this is what the Bible declares. Now, this same idea of darkness or dark places is found in Psalm 88, where it's rendered in darkness and also into darkness, in darkness in verse 6 and into darkness in verse 18. And I'll read the whole psalm again, because of the fact that it has to, it deals with, again, the Lord Jesus as a as pointing to him and his atonement. A song or psalm for the sons of Korah, to the chief musician upon Mahalath, Leonoth, maskil or poem of Heman the Ezrahite. O Jehovah God of my salvation, I have cried day and night before thee. Let my prayer come before thee. Incline thine ear unto my cry, for my soul is full of troubles, and my life draweth nigh unto the grave. I am counted with them that go down into the pit. I am as a man that hath no strength, free among the dead, like the slain that lie in the grave, whom thou rememberest no more, and they are cut off from thy hand. Thou hast laid me in the lowest pit, in darkness, in the deeps. Thy wrath lieth hard upon me, and thou hast afflicted me with all thy waves. Again, very similar to Jonah 2 as far as the waves. Thou hast put away mine acquaintance far from me. Thou hast made me an abomination unto them. I am shut up, and I cannot come forth. Mine eye mourneth by reason of affliction. Jehovah, I have called daily upon thee. I have stretched out my hands unto thee. Wilt thou show wonders to the dead? Shall the dead arise and praise thee, Selah? Shall thy loving kindness be declared in the grave, or thy faithfulness in destruction? Shall thy wonders be known in the dark, and thy righteousness in the land of forgetfulness? But unto thee have I cried, O Jehovah, and in the morning shall my prayer prevent thee or precede thee. Jehovah, why castest thou off my soul? Why hidest thou thy face from me? I am afflicted and ready to die from my youth up. While I suffer thy terrors, I am distracted. Thy fierce wrath goeth over me. Thy terrors have cut me off. They came round about me daily like water. They compassed me about together. Lover and friend hast thou put far from me, mine acquaintance into darkness. We also can go to another psalm, Psalm 143, 1-3. And again, this same word, Strong's number 4285, is rendered in darkness. A psalm of David. Hear my prayer, O Jehovah. Give ear to my supplications. In thy faithfulness answer me, and in thy righteousness, and enter not into judgment with thy servant. For in thy sight shall no man living be justified. For the enemy hath persecuted my soul. He hath smitten my life down to the ground. He hath made me to dwell in darkness, as those that have been long dead. Also, we can go to Isaiah 29, 10-15. And in verse 15, this word is translated, are in the dark. And this passage is addressed to Ariel, which is a synonym for Jerusalem and represents the churches and denominations, and as we're going to see as we read it, God's wrath upon them. Again, verses 10-15. For Jehovah hath poured out upon you the spirit of deep sleep, and hath closed your eyes. The prophets and your rulers, the seers, hath he covered. And the vision of all is become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one that is learned, saying, Read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I cannot, for it is sealed. and the book is delivered to him that is not learned. Read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I am not learned. Wherefore Jehovah said, Forasmuch as this people draw near me with their mouth, and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. Therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder. For the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid. Woe unto them that seek deep to hide their counsel from Jehovah, and their works are in the dark. And they say, Who seeth us, and who knoweth us? Well, Lord willing, in our next study, we want to finish up with Psalm 74:20, and then return to Genesis 49 and work on verses 6 and 7.
Thank you for joining us today for Searching the Scriptures. Until next time, to God be the glory.